Welcome to the Armchair Constituents, the weekly podcast about news topics. While we're not experts or academics, we do like to speak our voice freely. And keep in mind that as the facts change, so can our opinions.
We are now about to present the main attraction of our world-famous show.
What episode is it? 7? We're on 8. It's episode 8.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
We'll sit in double digits soon.
Get ahead of yourself. Welcome to episode 8 of the Armchair Constituents. I'm Jeff, and I'm with my co-host, Kramer. Say something, Kramer.
Oh, hi. Sorry.
I'm going to train you to be a part of these intros eventually.
I'm really a background guy, you know.
Yeah, bullshit.
Like
So we start talking about the Middle East or Turkey, and you go on a fucking 20-minute rant. Speaking of Turkey, that's our first update. So this week, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey was summoned over outrage, which I can only assume is because Erdogan's bodyguards were detained for a short period of time by police officers. A very short period of time. I don't even think they were taken away from the scene. They were just held after kicking people in the face.
Yeah, you marginally inconvenienced this guy that just assaulted a whole bunch of American citizens. I think we're owed something, buddy.
They're pretty upset about it. They just wanted to point out the stupidity.
They also called for the U.S. envoy on the anti-ISIS coalition, the somewhat unfortunately named Brett McGurk. It's a really weird last name. They called for him to be replaced because we continue to arm the Kurds and arm the YPG. And so the defense minister there, Çavuşoğlu, called for him to be removed. So that's really exciting. All the nice headway that we've made against ISIS is actually all for naught. It's a vast conspiracy to overthrow Turkey through the YPGs.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, we've been doing this the whole time. I'm just going to ask you, because I didn't really look into this that much. I just kind of had my little blurb on it. If we've been doing this the whole time, why have they come here twice? Are they trying to I don't even know what I'm trying to ask. What's
their end game with all the stuff they're doing? And I don't know. I've been wondering the same thing because they don't get along with the Kurds as a whole. I mean, they've done a really good job of killing them in the past.
The reason they assaulted these protesters is because they were Kurdish Americans or Kurds in America. I don't know. I don't know.
For me, when I look at it, I think it's a matter of functionality. Up to a point now, the Kurds have served a function, and the U.S. hasn't been as blatant as we have been in the past. I'm sorry, we haven't been as blatant previously as we are now about arming the Kurds, arming the YPG, things like that. I think for them, it just made sense at the moment. And I think it was also important that Erdogan needs an enemy. And the PKK is justifiably a very unpopular organization in Turkey. As I've said on here numerous times before, they like to blow stuff up, stuff that had nothing to do with the fact that, they're upset. They like to blow up civilians and things. And a heavily armed, Kurdish ethnic minority running around Syria, if the government can use that as a propaganda tool. And I think that they used it to the best of their ability to continue to give Erdogan power. And now that he has the power that he wants, he's going to try to utilize that. And we're going to either have to blink and once again, screw the Kurds because we've screwed the Kurds before when we said we would have their back, or we're going to actually have their back and it's going to cause a major dust-up with Turkey. I think it was all just a practicality game for them.
Well, I don't really know what to say to that. I was gonna be honest. I just don't really see the point in us messing around in there anymore.
Yeah, well, there was a really good write-up in The Atlantic. I may have mentioned it last week where Hassan retweeted it on Twitter. It was a great write-up that said the Americans are obsessed with the Kurds, and rightfully so. They're a fascinating, very, very dedicated group of people that have done a lot of favors for the U.S. in the past. But the problem is the Kurds really like the Kurds. A lot of other people don't like the Kurds because the Kurds are actually very Western. They're pretty secular. They're pretty multi-ethnic. And they are pretty progressive, especially with how they view gender roles in society. And in the conservative areas that we have groups like the YPG operating, they aren't going to get along if they try to have any sort of regional authority. So it's a long game question of, cool, these people are really useful for fighting ISIS right now, but what are you going to do in the long run? I don't know.
So that's kind of what I was trying to get to in the question. Like, we're just using them. Like, we're not actually trying to put them in power in Turkey.
I mean, no, God, no, not in Turkey, not in Iraq. I mean, from everything that I've read, and oh God, we all know I'm a world renowned expert. It looks like Syria is just going to be divvied up, and the Kurds will probably end up helping us in the same way that the Jordanians will defend things. From the stuff that I've read, it looks like Syria is going to be divided up into sort of quadrants, as it were, and the southern portion of it's going to go to the U.S. if that happens, and the Jordanians will help us secure that because Syria's southern border bumps up right up on Israel's northern border. So, no, I don't think we're going to give them any type of authority. In an ideal world, would I like to see a Kurdish state that's formally recognized by everyone? Yes, I think they've earned it 100%. The Kurds, it's really interesting. I'll probably should save it for later, but the Kurds in the 1970s, when the PLO was coming up, flirted with the idea of engaging in terrorism because the PLO wanted their plight to be heard, wanted the plight of the Palestinians to be heard. And the Kurds, the Kurdish folks like Jalal Talabani and Masoud Barzani, I think it was the two of them sat down and was like, look, should we engage in something like this to get our name out there for people to understand what we're going through? And they decided, absolutely not. This is totally unethical. I mean, I think the Kurds have earned their own state, but the problem is reality is not as kind to the Kurds as we would all, or at least I would like it to be. So it's just not really in the cards by any stretch.
All right, let's move to Venezuela, which we've talked about pretty much every week since we started this podcast.
Yeah.
Maduro this week he's attempting, I don't know that he's even attempting. He wants to rewrite the Constitution, allowing for a constituent assembly of 540 members, which I believe said only half of which would be elected.
Yeah.
I mean, this was immediately condemned by Julio Borges, the president of the National Assembly. He denounced it as it's essentially an evil announcement meant to divide, distract, and confuse Venezuelans further, and they just believe it to be just another tactic he's going to use to affect further elections or future elections. I don't remember where I read it, but Maduro's now claiming, or maybe he has been all along, that these protests in Venezuela are a U.S. plot to overthrow 21st century socialism.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the lack of medical supplies or food or any other basic needs of a country. It's just U.S. plot.
I think that was in Reuters or Al Jazeera, and I read that too. And I was initially just super dismissive. But then there was that part of me that was like, well, we did a bunch of shady stuff during the Cold War, like Iran, Guatemala, Chile. But I find a lot of us somehow being able to, in modernity, totally destabilize their economy in every way by controlling oil prices and limiting all of their medical supplies and purposefully causing a potential refugee crisis. I find that, like, we can't get a healthcare bill right, so I highly doubt we can do all of that.
Well, also, isn't this the same man that donated to President Trump's inauguration fund?
Actually, very true, yes.
So what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, apparently they're supposed to start picking, because it's supposed to be an assembly of like 540 people. Good God. But they're supposed to start picking these folks in late July, and apparently as early as December, if everything stays on track and, a coup doesn't happen or something. you could have the Constituent Assembly. It's attempting to
I saw
rewrite the
that.
Constitution.
Yeah, they said it would be like local officials. They would have like elections for half of this assembly. I don't know where the rest of them will come. I'm assuming they'd just be handpicked by Maduro.
Yeah, it's super weird the way they described it because only half can be elected, and some will be elected at a municipal level, and then some are going to be elected by farmers, students, workers, indigenous people, stuff like that. So I don't know how you determine who can vote or not, but that'll be interesting. I fully expect if this goes through and everybody votes and picks their representatives, it will not come out and give broad sweeping authorities to Maduro. I'm sure it's going to be on the level.
I have nothing else to add to that, so we're just gonna keep moving.
Yeah, I don't know. They're just really sorry that everything is happening to you, Venezuela.
We are back in the Korean peninsula. You brought this to my attention, I guess. The South Korea shooting down. I guess they thought it was a drone, or it was just an unidentified object. It ended up being propaganda balloons from North Korea. They shot down over the DMZ. Not really a whole lot going on there. The bigger story today, as same with last Sunday, is North Korea tested more missiles. This time, an anti-aircraft missile, which was organized by the Academy of National Defense Science, which I'd never heard of, but they're apparently a blacklisted.
They probably
agency.
invented it this morning right before they did that missile test.
The stuff I read called them a blacklisted agency, so I'm assuming that they're some kind of black market weapons dealer.
Yeah, I loved Kim Jong Un had a quote. Maybe it was Kim Jong Un, maybe it was someone else. But the anti-aircraft system was going to, quote, spoil their enemies' dreams, end quote, of air superiority. And then apparently they tried to do this like later last year, and they had some major problems. And the same person was saying that issues have been, quote, perfectly overcome, end quote. Anytime I feel like someone says, nope, everything's perfect, everything is 100% fine, it immediately throws you off guard. Well, it's like when someone tells you don't panic.
I don't know. I don't know if they just purchased this system or if this agency comes in and helps them set it up. I don't really know. I know that they ordered these systems to be mass produced, placed around the country for defense. I don't know. It wasn't. It's not really, like I said, it just happened, and I didn't really have time to sit and read into it so much. Not that there was that much to read into. It's just another.
Yeah, they probably just had really good representation from Stone, Manafort, and Kelly, and that's probably what it is.
So the last update we have, you want to talk about Somalia, which we touched on last week with the Special Forces operations in Africa.
Yeah. We had talked about getting into different sort of activities that are going on in Africa, especially with Vice and the New York Times publishing some information recently about the upscaling of a lot of our activities with the Special Forces over there, and Somalia seems to be the country that's in the limelight right now. And one of the big things they're dealing with is Al-Shabaab, which is a different language that I can't remember. It's probably Somali for the youth. And it's actually really interesting. Just kind of going through this, I just want to talk about, I guess, Al-Shabaab and Somalia for a second, and some of their background, and sort of, I guess, pose a question at the end of it too, which is going to be super long updates because we're asking questions left and right. But it's interesting. Al-Shabaab kind of reminds me of Hezbollah in Lebanon in the way that it's set up. I mean, this group was only founded in 2006. It's got between 7,000 and 9,000 members, roughly. It was started sort of in the midst of a Somali civil war, or the Somali civil war. The Islamic Courts Union was competing with the transitional federal government. And the transitional federal government had the backing of the Ethiopians. So they bring in the Ethiopians, and they take back Mogadishu, and they take the rest of the southern half of Somalia, which the Islamic Courts Union was in charge of. And the Ethiopians are apparently very aggressive in their fighting. So out of the remnants of the ICU, the Islamic Courts Union, and also sort of to function as a self-defense force, this group, Al-Shabaab, the youth, is formed. And they basically, I mean, I'm not defending them by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just sort of recounting how they came up. They just start to blow things up like crazy. They've engaged in countless terrorist attacks, kidnappings, bombings, things like that. And Somalia's right now trying to go through and replace all these troops from the African Union, bring up Somali troops, but they're having an incredibly difficult time with it. At the same time, our drone program is escalating a great deal over there. ISIS is getting footholds in. Al-Shabaab has pledged loyalty to ISIS. The Somali government is trying to get arms bans lifted, and they're on the verge of famines. There's a lot of difficult things going on right now, things that are terrorism related and non-terrorism related that are really important for Somalia. But it's super interesting reading through this because ISIS has gotten a foothold, they're getting a foothold if they already haven't, and we're sending special forces in to try to combat these extremists and these terrorists again. But I don't know, maybe you feel the same way I do. But I read these stories about things that are going on in modern countries, and I feel like I'm reading the same story constantly, and I feel like we're just starting the process for the next 30 years of regional warfare. I mean, I feel like, okay, well, they get some terrorists. All right, well, we send the special forces in, and then we send some drones in, and then we just keep escalating. And then we have the 2003 invasion of Iraq, but instead now it's the 2020 invasion of Somalia. I feel like we just go through the same cycle over and over again. And I'm no terrorism expert. I just have like no clue what type of alternate we could have to this.
I don't really know that there, like I said, I don't think there's any way we can just step out of the situation. You know what I mean? Like it's too much. It would be too much of a power vacuum. But at this point, and we're going to talk about it later with stuff in the Philippines. Actually, the next topic. So the first topic. But
perfect.
It seems to me like ISIS has a goal here to kind of create a, like, I don't even know how to say this. Like they're trying to conquer cities, and that sounds kind of absurd. It sounds like very ancient civilization, but they're creating that foothold to have like a staging ground, and that's what we're kind of trying to stop. But you're trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. You stop one, and it's just gonna keep happening. So yeah, I agree. It's gonna seem like we don't even finish one conflict and we have to go somewhere else and start. I mean, that's just kind of what it is. They're trying to spread us thin. And I mean, we're gonna talk about this stuff too. This isn't NATO, but we need other countries to step in and help, because we're just trying to police the world like we always have been. And it's gonna come to a point where you just can't keep doing it. There's just too much. It's too large an undertaking.
Yeah, I know one of the things I always feel like is that I'm really interested in history, and so like when we talk about the Philippines in a minute, I really wanted to look into Abu Sayyaf, so I wanted to go into their history, and you can just see this cause and effect. And I know that I'm always very wary of international intervention because I see, you just see the unintended consequences of all these actions, or you see the history because you have the hindsight of 100 years looking at the development of these issues. And I know it's always really easy to, and I'm sometimes tempted to be like, oh God, let's just pull out before we, mess anything else up. We've messed up a bunch of stuff. Let's just ease up at the same time. Like the situation has evolved so much, it's not nearly as cut and dry as it used to be. And it's really interesting.
Right. I mean, at some point you have like the libertarian side where like we should just stay out of everything. We should leave everybody to their own devices. But I mean, if we're seeing it right now, I mean, they're taking over cities. What are you supposed to do? You're just supposed to let them start conquering cities, and we're just going to go, well, they got to take care of themselves. When, I mean, how are they supposed to take care of themselves? There's nothing there to fight them. So if we've declared ourselves the enemies of ISIS, and vice versa, and they're taking over a city or a nation I mean, it's kind of hard to just to say, whoa, it's not our problem, because history says it is kind of our problem.
I think this will be a good segue into the Philippines itself, into the first topic. I think one of the things that's also difficult is that you have just different types of terrorism. I don't mean, you have Islamic terrorism or Christian terrorism and Marxist terrorism. But there are sort of different goals or modus operandi. And when I look at terrorism in Ethiopia, based off of my very one-dimensional and limited understanding of terrorism, I see a more modern ISIS-oriented terrorism, a terrorism that is attempting to purposefully destabilize the West to secure a caliphate or to secure an area that, for it, at least on its face value goal, deeper analysis will say, well, they're just a death cult than just nihilistic at the core of it. And they're using a Wahhabist sect of Islam as a vehicle for that. But I think the Philippines has a very different early 2000s type of terrorism. When I was reading ISIS Inside the Army of Terror, they were talking about the development with al-Zarqawi and the development of monotheism and jihad, which inevitably became Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which became ISIS in a very simplified way. Was that when al-Zarqawi started, he was just a Sunni nationalist. His goal was to unite Sunnis, and that was it. He understood that people were interested in their clan primarily, and then whether or not they were a Sunni or a Shia, and then whether or not they were Iraqi or Afghani or Pakistani. And that was kind of a more nationalist-oriented approach. And then it evolved from there into, what we have today, the much more death-focused, almost that nihilistic quality the terrorism has, as opposed to there's an end goal of nationalism. But when I look at the Philippines, with the history of the group that where martial law has been declared in I think it's the Mindoro Islands, the island group, that seems like a much more old school type of terrorism, because the conflict that has erupted and sort of come to a head at this moment with the declaration of martial law by Duterte dates back to the 1920s. And it was only in 1989 that it got religiously violent, which is interesting.
Do you want to just move into the Philippines now?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I thought it'd be a cool segue.
Yeah, we can just move right in. We don't really need to introduce it, other than, I mean, most people have probably heard that Duterte, he issued a statement, or he issued martial law in the southern
Mindanao, that's it.
In the southern portion. Sorry, say it again?
Yeah, so there's an island group called the Mindanao, Mindanao island group, and in that island group there is an island called Mindanao itself, so it can be a little confusing because you don't know if they're talking about the group versus just the island.
So from my little bit of research on this, it seems, at first, when I first read it or was hearing about it, they immediately they start talking about ISIS, and I'm gonna sound ignorant here, but they start talking about the Islamic State moving in, and you almost think like invaders, like they say they took over a city. When in reality, when you get into it, they're talking about radical groups already in the city aligning themselves with the Islamic State, and then using that as a means to take over the city, which they did. The name of the city, Marawi. You know what I'm saying?
Marawi or something.
Yeah. Okay, so that's fine.
It's close.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I said it kind of how you said it, so I'm just going to assume I was close. But it's a city of 200,000, mostly Sunni Muslim. But Tuesday, I believe it was Tuesday when it happened, these groups of militants beheaded the police chief and killed 2 soldiers, and then captured a Catholic priest and 3 people that were working in the church. And then, I mean, you can see pictures online where they're raising the Islamic State, the black flag. Tuesday night, local time, the military, the Filipino military, pulled out of the city, essentially making it the first city to fall to ISIS.
Yeah.
And then you have Duterte asking Putin. Well, he was in Russia when this stuff started happening. He came back early. He's asking Putin for.
Oh, thank God.
He's asking Putin for modern weapons. Like I said, he issued martial law. He's talking about. He suggested he might do it for the entire country if he feels ISIS has gained a strong enough foothold. But one of his statements is pretty crude.
Oh, Jesus, some of those were crazy.
Well, the one I have is, if I think you should die, you will die. If you fight us, you will die. If there's open defiance, you will die. And if it means many people dying, so be it. He said, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you have nothing to worry about. But he's just gonna go on a killing spree.
The quote I've got from him is in reference to martial law and whether the police or military forces that are helping enforce martial law and fight against the extremist group that's taken over the first city will be held legally or morally accountable. He said, "I and I alone will be responsible. Just do your job," and then follows that up with, "If you raped 3, I will admit it. That's on me." So
what?
Yeah. So he's like, hey, if you happen to rape while you're out enforcing martial law, he literally said, "I will admit it. That one's on me." That's a man that's got a military.
This is the same man that openly jokes about, not even jokes, brags about throwing people out of helicopters. This is a fucking sociopath.
Yeah, who's killed between 7,000 and 9,000 people, and the president loves it.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that when we talk about that later.
Yeah,
that's your favorite thing to do, is to work later segments.
It's foreshadowing, man. I love foreshadowing. But I kind of wanted to touch, because I know later
you wanted to touch on, what is it? How do you say it? Abu Sayyaf?
Yeah, Abu Sayyaf. So this translates so well with the conversation we're going to have later in the episode. So great, more foreshadowing. But when he talks about ISIS getting a foothold, or ISIS invading, we talk about that. It is such a gross oversimplification of what has happened in the Philippines. I got absolutely fascinated by this reading it. Well, and like I said, upwards of 10 minutes ago.
I understand the main goal of this whole thing is these militants want to secede from the Philippines, correct?
Yes, that's exactly it. This dates back to, like I said 10 minutes ago when I foreshadowed, this dates back to the 1920s. So for background, the Mindanao Island group is the only part of the Philippines that is not Catholic. The Philippines is an overwhelmingly Catholic nation. This group, which are ethnic Moros, M-O-R-O, they have lived basically by themselves for a long time, and they were getting along just fine. They warred with people around them like everybody else did, and they did bad things, and people did bad things back to them, but whatever. So around about the 1920s, the 1920s through upwards of the 70s, the Filipino state is trying to get more Catholics to move into the Moro region, because one of the criticisms that's launched at Israel is that they're sending Israeli settlers in to occupy Palestinian territory. That way they can be ethnically outnumbered, so it's hard to say, well, what type of territory is this? The Filipino state's trying to do the same thing. So they've been trying to relocate Christians there because they want all of the Philippines to be a united Catholic nation. So in 1969, there was a massacre of about 70 Muslim soldiers. The Filipino Special Forces has some ethnic Moros in it, and they convinced them, like, okay, we're going to go do this mission into a neighboring country. And they thought they were just doing an operation for the Philippines, but actually these, I think it's 65 or 70 Muslims were being sent into a neighboring country to try to destabilize it so that the Philippines could justify invading. And they said, we're not cool with that. So they all get killed, and they just kill all of them. And this sort of starts the open conflict between the ethnic Moros and the Muslims and the Catholics. And then in the 1970s, the Filipino state sponsors a group called Ilaga, which is a right-wing Christian group, and they basically give them guns and money, and they're like, hey, go kill a bunch of Muslims. So they go burn down mosques and kill people. And then they have border skirmishes back and forth. They're killing each other a lot. And then in 1989, this group called the Moro National Liberation Front, who has a sister organization called the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Their acronym is MILF, but we won't touch on them. They are granted autonomy over the specific island of Mindanao, not the island group, but the specific island. And they said, okay, we're totally cool with this, most of them. A fringe element of the group that said, no, we don't want autonomy for this one island. We want an independent state where we can live as Muslims and have a Muslim government, made the group called Abu Sayyaf. And they have been waging a terrorist war against the Filipino government since the late 80s, roughly. So it's like looking at this whole thing reminds me so much of literally our very first episode when we talked about the Chechen wars and how the Chechens behave to Russia right now. I think that's exactly how the Moros are and the extremists are behaving to the Filipino government. I mean, this conflict has been going on since the 20s, and it was only in like the late 80s that it started to get extreme and religious. It's absolutely fascinating, but I hate when people like Duterte take almost 100 years of history and just go, oh yeah, it's just terrorism, it's crazy Muslims. And you're like, it's actually not. I'm not saying what they did is right by any stretch. They're killing civilians. That's horrible. They're trying to engage in a civil war. That's ethically questionable. But you can't just boil down 100 years of history and go, oh yeah, our hands are perfectly clean and these people are just wingnuts. Sorry, end of rant.
Well, I mean, that's something we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but that's something that happens. They forget history and just start claiming these people as religious zealots that just decided to start murdering people. They have no idea why they would ever want to do something like this. Let's move into something local and a little less complicated. The Montana, I believe it was called a special congressional election. It wasn't just an election.
Yeah, I think it was a cage match, actually.
No, it was you telephone in your vote 4 weeks early. There was nothing. It was anyway. So most people have heard about this. I'm just gonna lay out a background. I already know, but tech billionaire Greg Giafort was charged with misdemeanor assault after body slamming and punching the Guardian reporter Ben Jacobs. He, of course, then won the election 24 hours later, maybe not even 24 hours later. I just found the real stuff interesting is just the blatant lying to the point where
people are.
Just the blatant lying by his campaign, claiming the aggression of the reporter, and when you actually read, he talks about it. If you listen to the recording, he tells him to go speak to Scott Scanlon, his press assistant, or I don't even know what the fuck you call him, but he in the statement to the police, he claimed that Jacobs grabbed Giafort's wrist and twisted around, and in this action knocked them to the ground. And then I'm assuming as Giafort fell, this isn't part of the statement, I'm just being a smart ass, his fist then punched him in the head.
It's also Ben Jacobs from The Guardian. Like, I'm not a big tough guy, but like Ben Jacobs does not look like someone who can manhandle anybody. Like he looks pretty tiny.
Well, yeah. Plus, I mean, when Fox News can't even defend your actions, you as a Republican, you fucked up. Luckily for him, 80% of the ballots were already submitted at the time of this. I don't even want to say that I'm completely sure that Montana would have gone against him, but Montana does have history of voting Democrats or voting for Democrats, so it's possible. Even though I don't really think that the Democrat in this race was much to talk about. But yeah,
I feel like he was a lot to sing about, though.
God damn it! I should have never told you that. But yeah, it's just I just found this story ridiculous. The fact that we now have a congressman who was charged with misdemeanor assault. I didn't know that assault was a misdemeanor.
It can be misdemeanor or felony.
Oh well, but yeah, now he's a congressman who represents a state or a piece of the state. And he,
I think that
if you ask him hard questions about healthcare, he'd punch you in the face.
Yeah, I also think that like, I went through, and this is if I had to boil, I feel like a lot of the political climate or recent elections down into one like Doonesbury comic, it would be the Montana special election, because it is. I feel like this Quist guy would have done really well in a rural district in Oregon. He just seems that way, folksy, ascot-wearing guy. I imagine there's bolo ties, a collection of them at home in a mahogany box, who his handlers have to keep him away from reporters that ask actual policy questions. And
Well,
then
Geoforce
there's
handlers have to keep him away from people that ask that too.
any questions, yeah. And then there's this other cat who said that the Bible didn't say anything about retirement, and we're using that as a basis for economic policy. So,
The Bible didn't
if I
say
were in
anything about a lot
Montana,
of things.
I would move. Just find the nearest state. Just like, you know what? Montana, next I think that Wyoming is one of the most sparsely populated states. Just go somewhere else.
You just got to get out of his district, right? He's not.
Sure, I don't know. If it's anything like the districts in North Carolina, that might be difficult.
Or really easy. There's a patch.
Yeah, or really
middle.
easy. It's like my backyard. Like, I just walked outside and I'm voting for Tim now.
So let's move from that. We're gonna move from that into the next topic, which is Trump's incredible budget proposal. He's supposed to. It hasn't even been revealed yet. It's not supposed to come out until Tuesday, but we have. It's all out there.
We got an early release.
Yeah, no early release. This has been reported on for a week and a half now. But like I said, it's expected to be fully released on Tuesday. But it's mostly just cuts to everything except military, Department of Defense, Veteran Affairs, and Homeland Security. That's about it. Pretty much everything else is getting cut. There's nothing left.
It's actually impressive. Like, I feel when I finish reading generally any type of Republican budget, but more specifically all of the budgets that have come out of like Paul Ryan and Donald Trump, I feel like I know so many more federal organizations or just bureaucratic organizations, like them or not. Like, when I go through and somebody lists out everything that wants to get cut, I'm like, I did not know all these were here. I feel like I can drop these into conversation now, and people think I know what I'm talking about. Look at this policy wonk over here. I mean, the Legal Services Corporation, I didn't know that was a thing until about 10 hours ago. And that's losing all of its funding.
What about the Corps of Engineers?
Oh, I knew that was a thing. I knew that was a thing.
I didn't know that was considered a government agency right up there with the EPA and the Department of Education. But, the biggest thing from this, because I'm not going to sit here and go through all the budget cuts, because Congress writes the budget.
You don't have that long.
Is all. We do have that long. We have plenty of time. But yeah, Congress writes the budget. None of this shit's coming through. Well, I won't say none of it, but most of it's not coming through, and most of these, most of the percentages of these cuts are not going to happen. But the biggest thing
30
is
to the State Department.
Yeah, the biggest thing he's talking about. What did he have to do? It was like just under $2.1 trillion of revenue that's coming from somewhere. That's going to balance this budget at a 3%. What did it say? A 3% growth annually.
It assumes 3% growth, but like apparently most economists are like 1.5 is optimistic.
Yeah, optimistic. Like 3%
we can probably
growth.
just move stuff from like one account to another just for a little while to hold over.
They're gonna cut all these programs. And then on top of that, spend how much are they spending on the wall?
$1.6 billion is going to a wall.
Yeah, so that's going to the wall. They're gonna increase the budget of the Pentagon, and then I don't know. Is this whole thing's ridiculous? All of this while also having the largest tax cut in history. So I don't know. I just don't know where. Like that's another thing the economists were touching on. Like the best way to balance the budget, because this is supposed to balance the government finances in the next 10 years. which it does if we have a 3% growth annually, but that's not going to happen. But, I mean, the economists have said, yeah, you can't cut taxes this much, but still somehow balance it.
I mean, even like
it's gonna.
I know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't have anything else. I'm just mostly just kind of confused.
Yeah. So there's 2 points I want to make. One is the Laffer curve. So a lot of people in the circles that I used to travel in, and some folks that I still hang out with, are big fans of people like Stephen Laffer. He came up with the Laffer curve. He's a supply side economist. The idea that at a certain point you hit a peak tax rate where the government gets the most revenue, but it doesn't negatively affect anything. But up to a particular point, so it doesn't affect businesses there. Businesses won't leave because taxes are too high. So you try to hit this optimal sort of zenith where you get the most for your tax. Without hurting people, without getting businesses to leave. And if you go over that too much, you're going to lose revenue because businesses leave. And if you don't hit that sort of zenith, then you aren't getting enough money, but taxes are still sort of so low that no more businesses aren't coming in because they were already at a point where more businesses were happy to come in. And I feel like anyone that is a supply side economist, anyone that was a Reaganite would look at this and go, wow, we're slashing taxes a whole bunch again, and we won't be able to actually grow the economy. This seems like it's in total contradiction with our Messiah, Stephen Laffer, and everything that he stands for.
Well, I'm glad you brought up like businesses and stuff, because it also touches on deregulating industry, and in the same sentence, putting stricter requirements on recipients of public assistance to make sure that they find jobs, because that's the issue. People on public assistance are just not trying.
It's definitely
to
all
get
those
jobs.
disabled people that we need them out there working.
Yeah, we're also going to touch on that later with Ben Carson.
No.
But yeah,
I know we've shit on the bill a whole bunch, and it totally deserves to be shit on. And after I say this like 2 nice things about the bill, I kind of want to go back to shitting on it a bunch, because there's like so many things to shit on it about. But a couple of rays of sunshine. Thanks to the what I can only assume is shrill pestering of Ivanka Trump, Donald has put in his wish list, I've heard 2 numbers, $19 or $25 billion for 6 weeks of paid leave for new parents. That's men and women, and that's egalitarianism right there. So that's a thing that's not necessarily bad. Most post-industrial societies in the Western developed world have those things, so good sign. The other one was, now, while he did want to get rid of debt forgiveness for anybody that goes in the public sector, he switched up a little bit for bachelors in the private sector. So, like, say you get a bunch of debt and with your bachelor's degree, he did, while increasing the interest rate that you would pay, 12.5% from 10% of your disposable income, he shortened the time to 15 years before your debt would be forgiven, which for most people statistically will save them a little bit of money. If you have a master's, it's 12.5, and you have 30 years before it's forgiven. So those people are still fucked. So, a little bit of sunny side there. It's too beautiful.
I hadn't heard that. So if you go in the private sector, you can get loan forgiveness. But if you go into public service, you get no loan forgiveness. Yeah,
now that was from the New York Times or WAPO, one of the two. I would encourage just double check it real quick. But it should be, if you stay in the private sector, your interest rates go up 2.5% to 12.5, but the number of years you have until it gets forgiven drops. Like I said, unless you get a master's, that's still 30 years instead of 15. So basically, you'll die with that debt.
Or you pay it off because you have a fucking master's degree.
In art history, Jeff, what are you going to do?
All right, whatever. You
back
can't
to
go
shitting on the bill.
Yeah. Okay. Fuck this budget. Like, zero out loan forgiveness for people that go into public service. Why? We're cutting the budget of the Peace Corps, eliminating the Corporation for National Community Service, AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, and Vista, which every president since FDR has supported some sort of like charitable organization or created some sort of charitable corporation to get citizens involved in building up the nation, and Trump wants to get rid of all that shit because it's to him it's useless spending. It's not for guns or a wall, so he sees no point in it.
It's teaching people not to rely on themselves, and that's why we have to slash $272 billion from welfare. Because, all those people on welfare are nothing but lazy.
Yeah. Like I said, most of this shit's not going through.
Yeah.
Even his fellow Republicans are like, no, we're not. No.
But $800 billion from Medicaid and $72 billion from Social Security disability payments. Now, I talked about this beforehand, but we'll ring this bell again. Mick Mulvaney, the guy that basically authored this budget, says Donald Trump is not violating his campaign promise to not cut Social Security at all, because we all know that Social Security disability payments isn't the real Social Security. How he came up with that little bit of semantic gymnastics, I don't know. But they're going to cut $72 billion from it. That's the plan, if the wish list gets granted by the evil Santa down below. And 17% of all Social Security beneficiaries receive Social Security disability payments. So almost a fifth. That's not a large amount or anything. Now, I'm not a fan of Social Security. In my own perfect world, we would stop doing Social Security entirely. We would basically tell you or my generation, sorry, you're going to have to pay in to keep all these people afloat, but we'll give you some tax breaks. Social Security is just, it requires a lot that we don't have. That's my perfect ideal world, but I understand that's probably not going to happen.
Well, yeah, you saw the by 2050. This is just a tangent, but by 2050 they're saying the life expectancy is going to rise to 100 years. Like
we need to start encouraging people to smoke again. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, the average life expectancy for Americans. I'm just going to say Americans because I don't know that it's specified. I just didn't read close enough. But to 100 years old, the retirement age is going to have to rise to 75 years old in order for the current structure to work. Keep in mind that they're also saying by 2050, pretty much every job will be automated. So I'm not really sure where this is going to go. You're supposed to work
probably some
75.
sort of proletariat revolution.
Well, yeah, by 2050, which is 33 years from now, we'll be in our late 50s.
I'll probably be dead by then, but
yeah. So if this article comes true, we'll be looking at another 15, 20 years of work. It's gonna be just, that's what you have to look forward to.
I don't know how much longer I can make the people in my office think I actually do stuff. Like, I'm skating on thin ice now. I'm not sure if I can do this for an extra 20 years.
Let's all right, let's get off the budget because
let's do something controversial now.
I just keep going back to this is Congress's baby. That president doesn't do this.
We had slow pitch softball right there. It's easy to beat the crap out of the Trump budget.
We have a whole this week in Trump to continue to beat the crap out of Trump and his compatriots. But right now we're gonna shift to Washington State, not DC, to Evergreen State College, which anybody that watches Tucker Carlson, I don't know if you do, but I don't. They had a man on
I don't watch television at all.
A biology professor from Evergreen State College, Brett Weinstein, who was there to talk about the fact that he had to host his classes last week. I'm assuming it was just last week, off campus, because of a controversy that had broken out over the campus minority groups asking for a day of absence, that's happened before. Typically, a day of absence is when
voluntary. I'm not going to show up.
Yeah, these minority groups.
It's like a day without women.
Yeah, they leave. They don't come to campus or come to work or whatever. But this was different. The head of one, I don't know what minority group. I don't even know if she was the head of a minority group, but they suggested a day of absence where white students and faculty don't come to campus to promote a safe space for minorities. And this this professor spoke out in an email, which you can read online. It's long, but it's pretty polite. It's not aggressive. He says it's basically it's not right to tell a group to stay away from somewhere based on their race. And he was rewarded by being attacked verbally by 50 students asking for his resignation and calling him a racist, and then told he couldn't come to campus by the campus police because they couldn't guarantee his safety. I believe that covers it. I believe that covers everything other than the president and his pronouns, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, that's just dumb. I'm so hesitant. I'm trying to think of analogies out of the gate, and I'm like, all right, think of historical examples. People aren't allowed to come to schools, and I'm like, don't be 1930s Germany. Don't be 1930s Germany. It's the only thing that can come into my head is like, I remember one time when a group of people were all told they couldn't come to a university. It was 1930s Germany. By no stretch am I making that comparison. I'm not Tim Allen, but
it's too late. They're already tweeting.
Oh crap! That's my one soundbite. I'll get 15 seconds of popularity for that. I'll be Breitbart famous. Perfect. Yeah, but wasn't this all based off of, just to, I guess, go a little bit farther into the background? The initial conversation and the day of absence for white students was built around students suggested that they were trying to get a whole host of demands met. Wasn't that part of what this was about?
No,
the university was like,
that came after the fact. They had a host of demands.
I thought that was before.
No, that came after the fact. This all started. I won't say it all started, but this professor also spoke out before when colleges or universities go out when they need to hire new professors. You know this, we know this because we've actually seen something like this firsthand. But they go out with a search committee to look for applicants. Like you typically, you seek out applicants. It's hard to explain. You're still applying for the job. But they have a committee that goes through this process, and the students called for them to hire more minority professors, which is fine. It's just the fact that you suggest that somebody should be hired based on their race, not on their background or I don't want to say prowess. What's the word I'm looking for? Based on
things
their
that they have no control over.
Well, no, you hire them based on their qualifications. You're not hiring them based on their race because they're black or Indian or male or female or anything like that. But that's what they want, and we've seen minority groups call for this before in our own life in university. This is just something that happens in liberal colleges where people are looking for this idea of a safe space. They want to feel represented, and they want that representation forced. They don't want it organic. They want to feel like there's people out there forcing this representation. Yeah. And when this professor spoke out against it,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
When his professor spoke out against that kind of put him on the radar. And then of course this comes up. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the time difference in it. How long between the first event and this event, but this was just the catalyst, and then it went from there.
Yeah. So I mean, I have two sort of split brain thoughts on this. The first one is the initial thing that he spoke out against that got him in trouble versus the reaction. Now, the initial thing that he spoke out against that got him the ire of the students, I am actually pretty neutral towards. Now I certainly don't believe that someone ought to be hired just based off of a quality they can't control, based off of their ethnicity or their sex or their sexual orientation, their gender, and anything like that. I believe one of those racist, sexist things that people ought to be hired because they're the most qualified for the position. But that being said, I've heard some good arguments from sociologists and from different social critics that you can see feasible for. Okay, you want to have a more multicultural staff. If you've got a white guy teaching African American studies, it's ironic and humorous in a Franz Kafka way. But you might want to have some more folks of color on staff. But I also get the argument from the other side too, which I'm kind of a believer of, is that we look at a current instance, and if we see any disparity in the instance, it obviously has to be inequality. There has to be a rigged system. I want to separate that thought from how they responded, because, like I said, I can see reasonable arguments for having a much more multicultural and multi-ethnic teaching staff. Their response was insane. I think that's the only word I could use for it.
What their response when they called for his resignation, or their response to call for a day of absence?
Yes to both, Alex.
Yeah, they. I believe one of the quotes I saw, they were shouting, "This isn't about you. This isn't about your white privilege." It's just like, stop reading Twitter feeds and then shouting them as if they're your actual thoughts. Yeah. I don't know. It's the whole thing is completely ridiculous, and it's just keeps to my mindset that nobody can see the other side of the fence. Everybody just has their group, and it's always a you versus me mentality. It's completely ridiculous to ask your fellow students and faculty to stay away because of the color of your skin. Are you completely incapable of then going, well, what if they asked you to stay away because of the color of your skin? This would be all over everywhere as blatant racism.
Yeah.
But for some reason, because if you're white, there's no such thing as racism for you. That doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting, and I know the two white guys sitting around talking about race is, while historically accurate of how most conversations about race have taken place, is a little bit hairy nowadays. I do find it very interesting, and I'm not a big fan of Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro's a little too conservative for my tastes. He also talks incredibly fast, so I find it difficult to know what he says. But he said he was accused of white privilege, and he said, I'm Jewish, I'm ethnically Jewish. He said, I always think it's really funny when social justice warriors, because he's the type of man that uses that phrase seriously, accuse me of being white. He said, Jewish people only became white when we became successful in the United States. And that's funny, but it is very interesting, I think, how in the United States we see such a very, very, and I use the phrase a lot because it's one of my favorites, one-dimensional division of ethnicity. It is black or white or Hispanic or Asian, or I'm not going to go off and name every ethnicity or race or nation of origin, but I mean, I think that we have just such a simple view of race that we totally forget that there are entire groups of people that we just classify as white that hate each other. I mean, you can go into Eastern Europe and you will find two technically white in the United States, but two also technically and correctly ethnically different groups that hate each other and want each other to die and have been killing each other for 500 years. And we just don't see that because we have you look different from me. Not actually we have a different cultural or religious or historical heritage that we have together, but you just look kind of different than me. And we don't want to see past that to actually learn something about different ethnicities. We want to have a very, very simple conversation about ethnicities.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was a more eloquent way of saying what I was getting to. But yeah, it's just people just don't have the ability to look at somebody else's point of view. They immediately jump to conclusions. And I mean that's just the end. They surround somebody in a library and scream at them to resign because they didn't want to not show up to work one day.
Mm-hmm. I do want to keep up with this because, like you said, this initially came out like the one of the guys went on Tucker Carlson, and when we initially found this, it was on the Blaze, and we had to do some digging to find a Washington Post thing on it. Then we felt a little bit better about it because it wasn't from Fox News or the Blaze, and it reported the same thing.
I think. I mean, we can keep. Yeah, we're gonna keep an eye on it. But the president of the college, George Bridges, came out and he.
That's my favorite part.
Well, I mean, we can read it again to go through it, but he goes and talks about what it is, their plan. They're talking about police training, privately funded police training, for techniques for safe and non-threatening engagement with students, and addressing anti-black racism, not racism, but specifically anti-black racism.
I mean, we all know it's the worst type.
De-escalation techniques, which is fine. Most of the stuff is fine. He likes to touch on trans, and they keep saying queer students, but they're talking about a equality center, sensitivity training. These are all demands. The students demanded that campus police are disarmed. They're not going to do that. Mandatory sensitivity training and cultural competency training for all employees. The president said they already have sensitivity training. It's done with everybody in the staff. They're already building an equality center. That's about it. He said he wasn't going to fire.
What the hell is cultural competency? He's not very competent at being Irish, but he's actually pretty solid at being German. I have no clue what the hell that means.
Yeah, I don't know. It means saying whatever. It means saying whatever the person you're speaking to deems to be culturally sensitive to them. Yeah. So you're pretty much fucked either way. You're never going to say anything right unless you say nothing at all. And then even then,
which would also probably be rude.
Yeah, so there's all kinds.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
It's this whole. I mean, it's right there in their main statement. They wanted the white people. They wanted white students and staff not to show up so that they could have a safe space for the day. So, I mean, they want a safe space where nobody with a different opinion or idea or skin tone show up or around them. So, I mean, there's nothing you can do that's going to be right in their eyes.
Yeah, I've got kind of two thoughts on this. One is, I know that you and I wanted to touch on this because it both, what's the word I'm looking for, pissed us off immensely. Just how stupid it is. But, I don't want to give a false impression in that sort of Fox News Weekly Standard, or to, take it even farther, Breitbart kind of way that this is by any stretch something that's like a normal occurrence. This just seems like outrageous and crazy, and it's also Washington State, which if... I don't even have an analogy. Washington State is just as weird as humanly possible. But I think the other thing about this is that I try to think of a rationale. It's just the root for the underdog, devil's advocate in me that's like, well, maybe there's a point to it. Part of me can see the idea of you want them to experience discrimination, so you get it. But as I'm rationalizing these thoughts, trying to think of a way, and maybe because we have the email from that one particular professor, it would be better if we had direct primary source communications from the lady that recommended it. But as I try to rationalize this in my head, I just feel like Sean Spicer trying to make sense of all the bullshit that comes out of Trump's mouth. That's exactly how I feel. It's like I'm just functioning as a filter to try to make this sound reasonable for the sake of argument, and I can't. It's rather difficult. The day of absence part. There are strong arguments for a lot of the things that they've advocated for the police. I'm a huge fan of de-escalation training. I think dealing with training students.
They didn't advocate. They didn't advocate for de-escalation training.
They did? I thought they did.
No, that was the...
That's reasonable. That makes sense.
That was George Bridges, the president's thing. They were going to privately fund, and it was going to have all the de-escalation training, about rapid response to sexual assaults. All that stuff was what he said. They demanded that the campus police be de-armed, to have that, so they don't have no weapons. That was their demand. They weren't being reasonable.
Get that.
Say what?
I don't get that by any stretch. You and I went to a college where they had armed security because security functions as legal use of force.
It's because of police shootings. They want them to be disarmed. Which, I mean, I'm not gonna say I understand the argument because I don't think that police need to be disarmed, because at some point you may want an armed police officer if something happens.
I generally want mine armed.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. They're incapable of seeing anything past race. This is their world, and they're at their liberal college. I mean, we've experienced stuff like this. It's just when you read about it, it's one of those things where you don't expect this much to be happening in one area. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that they weren't, pretty much nothing that they were demanding was rational. Like, these are their actual these are their actual demands.
I almost thought they said thought they said something constructive for a second there, and I was sorry, I was wrong.
They wanted to disarm campus police. They want mandatory sensitivity and cultural competency training, which is already there. They demanded the university build an equality center, an equity center, which they were already doing, but I don't think they're just demanding that the university build a center. I'm assuming they would make it so nobody else could come in, but minorities. I don't really know. I don't, judging from some of these demands, but yeah, those are their actual demands.
People that say things like these and make some of the demands that these people have made. I'm frightened by people that have such a narrow sense of identity. I'm a person that doesn't get my sense of identity from things I can't control. I am a white guy. I get no sense of identity from those things. I had no control over those. I've got brown hair. I got zero control. I mean, I could dye it if I wanted, but I don't care. I don't get my sense of identity from a lot of my physical features, things that are more or less just a result of nature. And I understand the argument against that is that I don't get identity from it because I've never had to deal with discrimination based around it, and I feel like that is a reasonable argument, because if people are just neutral towards me, I don't get a sense of identity. But if people didn't like me because I was white, then maybe I'd get a sense of pride and identity from it. I can get that. But I think it approaches, I don't want to say dangerous, because dangerous always implies violence or something like that, but it approaches an unhealthy level when everything about how you view yourself and how you view the world is built around one tiny iota or one tiny tadpole in this giant lake that we are in, where you have all these problems. And it's when you filter everything through one lens, that filter gets really dirty and it doesn't filter things as well anymore. It's really frustrating to see this, because these people make you got legitimate points sometimes, but when everything is run through that fucking filter, you look like an idiot.
Oh yeah, you can say that about anything. You have conspiracy theorists that may
free markets. So you're one of those people. Free markets fix everything.
I mean, you have people like, because I don't want to make it. I don't even want to make this all about race. You have you have people like let's just talk about libertarians who filter everything through libertarian ideals, and if it's even slightly to the left or right or off center, they condemn it completely. They have no way of seeing but one way. And you have conspiracy theorists who take every action. I mean, I know people that you can't even talk about movies without them trying to relate it to a conspiracy theory. And it's just one of those things, at a certain point, it's just like, Jesus Christ. Just, you gotta fucking relax. You gotta have some kind of chill where you can just talk about something other than this aspect that you've dedicated, clearly dedicated every aspect of your life to.
Yeah. But it's you're 100% right, especially with that libertarian thing. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but there's people that think DUI laws should be gone, that age of consent laws should be gone, that all of these things like, oh no, it's statism, you shouldn't be stopped for speeding, I can't be detained. It's absurd. And you have, again, these people bring up legitimate points. Yeah, they do bring up legitimate points, and the drum that they're banging sounds good when those notes are just right and they're hitting those other points. But when they don't stop banging it, you're like, Jesus fucking Christ, it's 3 a.m. I'm trying to sleep. Stop making that racket. Same thing with conspiracy theorists. Alex Jones touched on the drone war very, very early. A broken clock is right twice a day, but I think Alex Jones has a 24-hour clock, so it's only for 1 second each day that he is right. And he was right on that. But he bangs that same drum constantly. And it's incredibly frustrating because, again, I feel like it's just this one-dimensional worldview. You pick your filter. It's like playing World of Warcraft or something. Pick your class, pick your skill. All you can do is hurl fireballs at people. It's like the old adage, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If the only thing you run your ideas through is your one particular filter, race, government intrusion, government conspiracies, even some of the hard left is like Marxian school. If you run everything through the concept of class consciousness, everything looks like it's class consciousness, and you can rationalize everything. It's sad and frustrating because legitimate points are drowned out amidst absolute bullshit.
Yeah. I think we've made. I think so.
Yeah,
I don't want to keep.
the only
I don't want
the only tool that we have is shouting, and we made this look like a nail line.
No, I think we had good ones. This happens every topic. I don't plan for the segue, so we get to the point where I'm just like, well, we beat this to death. And at a certain point, I'm like,
Speaking of news topics,
we didn't really beat it to death. We just kind of needed to move on.
made our point.
So yeah, this is going to be the hard topic, right?
Yeah.
So we're not really going to touch on the Manchester bombing. We kind of talked about this all week, how we wanted to do it, if we wanted to do it. So we're not. Everybody knows what happened. Everybody has heard something about it. What we're going to choose to focus on is it seems to be this rise in we were just talking about racism, but this thing where people they can't associate someone that is Muslim, or they can't dissociate somebody that is Muslim with somebody that is a terrorist. I guess that's the best way to put it.
I think the best way to sort of frame how people view it is there was some politician that was on Fox News back in the early 2000s that he said, not all Muslims are terrorists, but most terrorists are Muslims. And I think that is how we view terrorism. I feel like because we have been steeped in the culture that we are, we consume the news that we do, and we have lived some of the events that we have lived, we can't disassociate terrorism from Islam, which I am personally horribly opposed to. I mean, I'm an atheist. I don't like organized religion by any stretch of the imagination. What I hate more than that is people like Duterte that just break down all of history to the last 10 minutes and decide this is the story we're running with, and Islam is bad. I fucking hate that.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, a lot of these recent terrorist attacks have used Islam as a vehicle for it. But I get you. I mean, I won't say you hear it all the time, but I hear it enough where people are just they look at somebody that is Islamic or of it's not they don't even have to be Muslim. They just may look like they could be Middle Eastern, and anything they do is scrutinized or ridiculed, or there's something said about them, and it gets to the point where it's fucking ridiculous. And we have a lot of very ignorant people running around who refuse to educate themselves and want to spew nonsense about how the Quran talks about murdering Christians, and they bastardize and pervert the message that these people follow just as much as these terrorists bastardize and pervert the message. Yeah. For instance, there's no like national like headquarters. Yeah, there's no pope for Islam. So you hear people, well, they're not condemning it. Yes, they are. You're just not looking for them to condemn it because you're too busy spray painting the side of community centers, saying God knows what about a Muslim or a Muslim organization, or burning down mosques, or just making snide comments. I saw a Muslim at a shooting range. He's probably training. You're like, fuck you fucking asswipe. Like, it's just shit like that. I hate that. I hate bullies, and just there's too much of it going around. And I told you, I kind of started this with the statistic. It's like a 57% increase in anti-Muslim attacks of all sorts in the last 2 years or year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
These instances of people just these like blatant intolerance, and the same thing is happening with Mexicans. It's this Trump's America where you can just do whatever you want and there are no consequences.
Yeah, I mean, I think one that's something that I touched on before, and touched on in the piece that we're finishing up writing, is you're externalizing the internal. You got problems? Well, let's put it on someone that doesn't look like us. But two, I think people have zero concept of history. Now, I'm sure that I have said things on this through the course of our recordings that have been historically inaccurate, things that I read that people dispute, and there's people that dispute the things that they dispute and agree with me, and don't dispute it. But I feel like people lack a proportional understanding of history. And anytime I get in conversations with folks about the state of terrorism today, and again, we use terrorism as we default to Islam, despite the fact that 20 years ago, the IRA was one of the biggest threats to terrorism. Terrorism was the IRA. There's Catholics blowing stuff up, killing civilians.
I'm glad you touched on the IRA, because we just had a bombing in Manchester. If you go back 20 some odd years ago, the IRA bombed, I believe, what did they bomb? I don't want to say Congress.
It was a hotel. Not too far from there, right?
I thought it was something to do with like Parliament in Manchester. I know Parliament's not in Manchester, but there was something political. Could have been a hotel, but I looked into that, and I mean, I've gotten in arguments with people, and I'm not going to talk about these arguments, but this idea they believe it's Christians versus Muslims, and Christians don't commit terrorist acts, white people don't commit terrorist acts, and that's just not the truth. So you can keep going. I just no. It's a fine interjection. Yeah, I mean, they still have clear trash bins in parts of the UK from where they were bombed by the IRA, because they still deal with it. Like, we didn't condemn all of Christianity. We didn't condemn all of Catholicism. We understood that it was a crazy batch of people. And I think there's two fundamental things. One is that the Middle East has always been to... Edward Said wrote this great book called Orientalism, and it was just a study. It was written in the 1970s. It's the foundation of the school of political theory called constructivism. And constructivism just says you have to be aware that you have to be cautious that you don't construct your own enemy. You don't think someone behaves a certain way, so you assume they behave certain ways. You tell other people they behave certain ways, and you treat them like they behave those ways without actually knowing. And I feel like we, to a degree, have that. We have to be aware of our own filter. I mean, the entire region of the Middle East is only called the Middle East because of its relationship to Britain. We have this Western view, and we will only have a Western view of it. We'll only have an American view of it because most of us aren't going to, Islamabad anytime soon. We don't know the culture. We weren't raised there. We're going to get a filtered version of it. But I feel like the version that we get is a distorted version. We get a version that the only thing we hear about it are bad things. The only thing we hear is a bombing, or a crazy person did something, or the government is falling, or the Taliban is back. The second thing is that we don't have a proportional understanding of history. Anytime I get in conversations with folks about the current state of terrorism, and like I said before we got into the IRA, we just assume that we mean Islam when we say it. But anytime we get into conversations, my answer is always the Cold War. All of this, or not all of it, but a lot of it can be traced back to the Cold War so easily. I mean, the United States, the Pakistanis, and the Saudis funded and educated Muslims in madrasas along in the Pashtun region on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border to be the Mujahideen. The point of these was to train people in such an aggressive religious way to fight the atheistic Soviet Union. And we made that tool, and we set it loose, and it did what we wanted, and then we said, okay, don't fuck up anything, please. We're just going to go bye-bye now. And I mean, you can look at the direct lines between the Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. I mean, in 1979, the Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia was taken over by a guy named Juhayman. And so many of these things can be traced back to the radical education that we wanted these people to be put through. And we're going, well, this is just the way Islam is. Well, not really. Because if you can go a little bit earlier back into the Cold War, Gamal Abdel Nasser, not a good man. I'm interested in him, not a good man, like torturing people. But he was good enough to get up in front of the assembly in Egypt and say, oh, the hardliners say we need to veil our women. And everyone just laughed. Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran, devout Muslim, very much for equality of the sexes. There's so many examples of devout Muslims throughout the course of history, and especially during the 1950s and 1960s with the rise of technocracies and the Cold War. Yeah, they were devout Muslims, but that shit didn't influence their policies. It was just a thing that they happened to be. There is no direct connection to these things, and people want to constantly ignore. And I know that the United States gets dragged under the bus because we've done some bad things.
if Noam Chomsky says the United States is a bad place one more time, my head will probably explode. And we get beat up a lot. But there is a reality to it. There is a reality to, we made this bed and we're going, we made the bed and we go, oh shit, who made this bed here? We sort of did a bunch of this and we have some of this responsibility, but it's easier for us. It involves less research, it involves less thinking, it involves less self-reflection for us to go, that's just the way that they are.
Yeah.
End of thread.
And that's why I need you here, because my rant would have just been railing against ignorant Americans for 10-15 minutes, whereas you gave me the point.
I
agree with what you're saying, and that's what you're going out against right there is exactly what people say. They try to claim that their religious texts call for this stuff, and this is just how they are. They want to kill anything that's different than them. And I wanted to focus on stuff like this because every time there is some sort of terrorist attack, they never focus on, I don't want to say the terrorists, they never focus on the actual issue. They just start talking about it. They just start talking about Islam and start railing against Muslims. And we've seen it this week. And I'm talking about the general public in these countries, because you have, and there's plenty of good people too. I should probably preface that, because we're going to talk about the story in Oregon. It was in Oregon, right?
Yeah, it was in Oregon.
Yeah, where it was three people. I don't know if the third person died yet. That sounded really bad. I don't know if the third person actually died.
I only heard it was two that died.
So far, I know there was a third that was in bad shape from the stabbing. But it was in Portland. Basically a 35-year-old man on a train in Portland he was just there. He was spewing nonsense about Muslims have been killing Christians and all Muslims should die, and 3 men stood up to try to get him to calm down. He pulled a knife and stabbed and killed 2 of them and injuring a third. But this was all directed towards 2 young girls. I believe only one of them was Muslim. When we were talking about earlier, she had a head covering on, but I could be wrong. But it's just stuff like this, and we can go into even more cases of threatening letters and, like I said, burning of mosques, all that stuff. But
I think
it's just
part
stuff like
of it is. Sorry, go ahead.
This is the kind of stuff that gets to me, is because this is the kind of stuff that organizations like Al Qaeda and ISIS are trying to do. They're trying to cause this violent divide between people, because it does nothing but support their message and bring more people into their fold.
Oh yeah. So to jump off that, you make an excellent point there. One of the things that al-Zarqawi wanted to do with monotheism and jihad was make people hate the West. He wanted the West to invade so that people would grow to hate the West. He wanted to sow seeds of animosity between the West and the Iraqis, specifically the Sunni Iraqis, and he wanted to sow seeds of further discontent between the Sunnis and the Shias in Iraq. Everything that they do is everything that groups like this want. They're built around negation. They're built around hating something, and that's all it is. And it feeds into that idea. I think one of the, also just tangentially related to, one of the things that, sorry, I just smacked my mic. One of the things that bugs me is just a lot of the assumptions that we make. We assume all of Islam is this giant monolith. It's just these rules right here. But there's a great book called What is Veiling that goes into a lot of the cultural background of it. Now, I may have mentioned it on here before, but technically, in the Quran, the only thing it says you have to have covered is your hair. It's technically it. If you wear a hijab or a niqab or a chador or anything beyond that, that is largely based off of your cultural background. In places like Nigeria, where you have decent-sized Muslim populations, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you find a lot more just hair coverings. You don't see like a full niqab or a full chador or something like that. But if you go to more conservative places, You see way more full coverings. Everyone wants to look at the common denominator and go, oh, well, all these places have bad things. What is it? Oh, it's got to be Islam. Not necessarily. There's so many different interpretations of Islam that all say different things. You know, I know that I shared it with you. I told you about it. You and I watched the video. And of all things, I never thought I would like an ad a telecom did, but it was a telecom ad that was done. It was for Ramadan, and it was even for a telecom, it was a message of peace against terrorists, or using peace as a tool to combat terrorism because it feeds off of hate. And Jesus Christ, I sound like a fucking hippie, but there's a legitimate point to that.
Oh yeah, that's the whole thing. That we were talking about it earlier. Is this people that aren't capable of any kind of empathy to see something from another side. You spoke about it earlier with the IRA, is how they didn't condemn all Catholics or Christians because of the acts of the IRA. They saw them as just a crazy sect of terrorists. But for some reason, when it comes to organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, all we see is, well, these people are Muslims, so all Muslims must be for this. They don't have any... I just... I don't know. Like, you and I try to look at everything from the other side. That's even when we don't agree with it. What is the first thing we do? We go and Google the other side's argument to try to figure it out. Whereas these people, they're jumping to assumptions, and they're completely incapable of realizing that there's no way that this little girl on a train has anything to do with that just because they follow the same religion, any different than somebody that is Christian had anything to do with this murderer on a train who decided that he was going to scream about Christians being killed by Muslims and start stabbing people. You're following the same faith does not make you the same person. Doesn't make you a murderer or a terrorist or anything. But for some reason, people can't understand that, or in some cases won't understand that because they have their own prejudices that they can't let go of. And until that happens, I don't see a lot of this stuff getting better because no one's ever going to accept it.
Exposure to something. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Yeah, exposure to something is the single best thing to get you to stop being scared of it. When I was in college, I took history of Islamic civilizations, and part of the requirement was to read the Quran and go to a mosque. And I did not even know that there was a mosque where we went to school, and I went, and they were super nice people, very accommodating. I went with some religious friends that were uncomfortable there, uncomfortable like wearing a headscarf or having things separated by sexes. Super nice people. I got to know it. I got to know more about the religion, and I stopped being scared of it. Exposure therapy works, and isolating yourself from it and wanting an easy answer. Easy answers breed dumb people, because easy answers are never right by any stretch of the imagination. And we want an easy answer. Like I said to you the other night, I just want to know who I'm supposed to hate. Just cut to the chase of it. Good guy, bad guy. Do we bomb them? Do we give them bombs to bomb other people? I want that simple answer. In this, when you deal with any type of religion or any type of international issues, everything is sloppy. It's horribly sloppy. I feel like a lot of people want to insulate themselves in their little bubbles on the left and the right. But a lot of this hate more comes from the right side of this, if we're perfectly honest. They want to insulate themselves in their little bubbles where climate change still doesn't exist, and the Earth is 6,000 years old, and the Methodists also go to hell. And I know that's a vast oversimplification, but I feel like a lot of these people believe in insulation because exposing themselves to it would shake their worldview. The worldview is so delicately put together and fragilely constructed that anything that upsets it can shake it aggressively. So you have to protect yourself from that.
Right. I think for a lot of people that's the underlying, like the subconscious reasoning, but in reality, a lot of them are just. This is going to sound really aggressive, but they're so ignorant to it, they don't even realize that any of this is wrong or racist. This is just their life. You know what I mean? Like this.
Yeah.
These are just facts. Like the same as these are just natural facts to them. They don't question it because why would you question it? Like.
Yeah. There aren't a lot of Muslims in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa's great. Islamabad sucks. Probably related.
Yeah, we should put that in context before that's clipped somewhere.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
yeah. So let's move off this topic.
Yeah, our last topic. Yeah.
Let's go to our last topic, which is the Supreme Court ruling in North Carolina on.
You know how much you love North Carolina?
Yeah, I think this is like the third week in a row. But so Justice Kagan strikes down the Districts 1 and Districts 12 in North Carolina for racial gerrymandering. I'm gonna let you take the point on this because this is kind of you've done most of the research here.
Yeah, so Gorsuch sat this one out. So it was a vote of 5-3 with a dissent by Alito, Kennedy, which his dissent is super interesting, and I want to get into that, and John Roberts, Chief Justice. Gorsuch wasn't around for initial oral arguments, had to sit it out. So basically, this is the second time that the Supreme Court has heard the cases about these two districts, I think specifically, at least District 12, because there's District 1 and 12 that are up here. And this is the third time in the past, I think, 15 years that North Carolina has gone to the Supreme Court over their gerrymandering. Last time was argued 2008, ruled in 2009. But this is Cooper v. Harris, I believe. And basically, what happened in North Carolina is that there were two districts that were blatantly gerrymandered. It was argued to cluster ethnic minorities, specifically Black Americans, together to make it easier to elect Republicans. Now, it is illegal to gerrymander along racial lines. It is perfectly legal to gerrymander along party lines. It's not for the Supreme Court to decide, whether that's right or not. It's up for them to decide the law. So, District 1, for instance, has 2 to 3 times the number of minorities, specifically Black Americans, as any of the other districts around it. And the state of North Carolina argued that, look, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 says that, and apparently this is true in Section 2, says that you have to give ethnic minorities the ability to elect a representative of their choosing. So their idea was to cluster as many Black folks as they could into a couple of districts so that they could purposely lose those districts. District 12, whereas District 1 is this big octopus-looking thing with a giant body, District 12 is kind of this weird, funky serpent. And it was the exact same thing. They were just argued that they had to get as many Black folks as they could in a district so that, they were in compliance with the Voting Rights Act. Now they also argued this in 2008 with Bartlett v. Strickland, which is the case that Kennedy flipped his vote on. They got shut down there too. But basically, District 1 had been electing minority and Democrat representatives for years and in landslide victories. So it's like blatantly District 1 was doing just fine representing minorities. There was no issue. The Republican Party of the state of North Carolina just wanted to collect as many Black folks as they could so that they could just pool their votes, because they only still get the same representative, so they couldn't vote in other districts. The court came down and said, hey, look, this is illegal. You're doing it along racist lines. The dissent was actually super interesting. So Alito wrote the dissent, and he said nothing about District 1 the whole time. In the entire dissent, I went through it, he never mentions District 1. So he's basically admitting, yeah, District 1 sucks. District 1 is racist. His issue was with District 12. And back in, I think it was 2001? 2001, the Supreme Court heard a case about District 12. And Justice Alito had said, hey, is there, because apparently party affiliation in North Carolina is very heavily split upon race lines. White folks are Republicans, Black folks are Democrats. And he said, is there a way to redistrict District 12 so that it is districted along party lines, which is legal, but not districted along race lines, which is illegal, and the shape look any different? And the people that were arguing that the district was racist said, well, no, there's not. We can't provide you a map that redistricts in that way that doesn't look the same. So their dissent was, look, this looks really bad in District 12, but there's no way that you can do it to redistrict along party lines, so we aren't comfortable saying that this district is blatantly racist. They didn't say anything about District 1. But this is an interesting flip, because back in 2009, Kennedy wrote the majority opinion in an opposite circumstance, Bartlett v. Strickland, where districts were purposefully gerrymandered along racist lines. And I guess the difference is that in this circumstance with District 12, there's no way to redistrict it that it looks any different and not be legal or illegal. So, interesting case, to say the least.
So, what's coming of this case now? Are they redrawing these districts, or?
That's based off of the ruling that Kagan wrote. I mean, that's what it seemed like it would be. Districts 1 and 12 have been deemed to be illegally gerrymandered along racist lines. They would have to redistrict. I don't know if they just go back to how it used to be districted. But District 12 has looked funky for a while now. I mean, at least since 2001, the past 16 years. So I want to keep up with it to know, but I would assume they would have to be redistricted. I said redistrict so many times in the past 3 minutes. Good God. Whew, I'm sweating from it.
I mean, that would interest me, because you obviously can't redistrict these two without taking or adding to other districts in the surrounding area. So it's good. It should be a significant undertaking, I would assume.
Yeah, and like I feel like Justice Kennedy is my favorite justice. I think he's a super cool dude. He's ruled for some things I don't agree with, but I really like him. And I was a little interested, but I totally get his point about District 12, which is, look, not saying it's ethical that you should be able to district along party lines, but it's also not illegal. And I can't tell you to not do something. I might think it's shitty, but I can't tell you to not do it because it's not illegal. District 12 is, kosher. It's just weird, and it's an unfortunate circumstance. And I don't think it's cool to, gerrymander along party lines. That seems pretty shitty. But,
I mean, most stuff in North Carolina is pretty shitty. So North Carolina is this podcast. They just shit on them at any chance, anything in the news. I didn't even find this. You did, so we're both contributing to the hate of North Carolina. But no more talk of redistricting.
No more topics.
Now it's time to move into all the
TWIT.
All the shit that Trump and his... Oh, yeah, it is TWIT.
TWIT this week in Trump.
Anyways, I guess we should start with John Brennan's statements to the House Intelligence Committee this week, where he talked about contacts and...
Basically, he's sure that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence, and he was nervous.
He turned over intelligence to the FBI that showed interactions and contacts with Trump's campaign, people in Trump's campaign, and Russian actors, ambassadors. That I don't know if you listened to it or not, but when Trey Gowdy was grilling him to say whether or not it was evidence, they were very stuck on him saying that this was evidence of collusion. They wanted him to say evidence. He was like, I'm not going to use the word evidence. I just turned over.
It's just because you want me to do it, I'm not going to do it.
Also, in the same coin, you found out stuff about Trump trying to get Coase and Rogers, the department heads of national intelligence and the NSA, to come out and basically publicly deny any connection between his campaign and the Russians, which they wouldn't do. It's not really anything directly connected to Brennan, but it's just something I added in there as a...
It's worthwhile noting.
Well, it's just the fact, it's just yet another instance where Trump is trying to... It's just, at some point, it's got to be hard.
Really bad.
Yeah, at some point, it's kind of hard to keep denying that he's not trying to cover something up, and also this is gonna get to the point where he can't continue to deny he had any place in these actions, even if he didn't. The fact that he's like actively trying to cover this stuff up, which we're gonna keep getting into with Flynn and Kushner now, because we had Michael Flynn decline a subpoena from the Intelligence Committee, and so he's pleading the fifth. That's essentially it, because he had no comment and his attorney had no comment. So.
Well, Mark Warner and whoever the hell that Republican guy is who's on the Senate Intelligence Committee said, if you don't, I just can't remember his name. It's just Mark Warner's from our state, and I kind of like him. He was like, hey, if you don't give us their documents, we might hold you in contempt of Senate or whatever the hell it is. So it could be an interesting development. Yeah. Well, anyway, apparently he's just begging for immunity too. So part of me thinks what's going to happen with Flynn is he'll beg, and like he'll like, all right, I'll turn over some documents if you give me immunity. He'll get immunity. And I think Flynn's ultimate role is going to be like kind of Carter Page-esque. Like his actual involvement with collusion with the Russians, I think will be pretty minimal. Like to the level that Carter Page was. It won't be anything groundbreaking, but it's the not registering as a foreign agent, working for Russia, working for Turkey, getting paid by RT, is like all of the crap at once just looks super bad.
Yeah, you could say that about pretty much anybody in the administration right now. I think Steve Bannon hates foreigners so much, he's probably the cleanest person in there. We didn't really talk about it, but like the stuff about Jeff Sessions not disclosing meetings with Russian ambassadors.
Oh yeah,
that came out this week. Apparently, he was advised not to put it on the forms, and then when it came out, he was like, "I'll go amend it." But it's like,
that's not how that works.
Yeah, it's not. Well, apparently that is how it works. You can just.
Can I amend my loan application after I already got the loan? No. Oh, all right.
You can't, but you're also not in the White House. Apparently, if you're in the White House or in any kind of public office, you can do whatever you want, like amend documents that are perjured and chokeslam people.
Have secret meetings with the Russians.
Speaking of secret meetings with the Russians, Jared Kushner, I have an entire paragraph on this guy. Like he had, this is supposed to be quick little snippets, and it's like, Jesus Christ, he should have had his own topic. He had at least 3 undisclosed contacts with the Russian ambassador, 2 of which were phone calls that he claims not to remember because he has thousands of phone calls a week, which is probably true, but you didn't forget this one.
I would remember espionage.
But he's still I think he's still only a person of interest. Like he's not actually under investigation yet, though I feel like that could change at any moment. Because the stuff came out after Trump won the election, he wanted to set up a back channel with him and Putin that would bypass intelligence agencies, which we already knew that's something that was set up, but we didn't know that Jared Kushner was the one trying to set it up with Flynn, I believe. The biggest thing was the stuff about his business. Did you hear about that?
Oh,
yeah, where Yuri Milner was a big investor in his real estate company, Cadre. I believe that's how you say it. The
word cadre is never used in any good circumstance. The fact that they have a business named Cadre is awful. What is it? Oh, it's a cadre of murderers. Cool.
We also have, he has ties to Gorkov. And then there's the stuff about Roman Abramovich, his wife, being invited by Ivanka Trump to the inauguration for some reason. And then the $1 billion in loans from 20 lenders, and his guarantee to pay back $300 million of that, which is he has ties to George Soros, Peter Thiel, and Goldman Sachs.
It's weird because isn't George Soros funding like the cultural Marxists that are bringing down America and not the right-wing people? Whatever. That doesn't fit the narrative. We'll ignore it.
But yeah, we have the DNC Deputy Communications Director, Adrian Watson, calling for Kushner's security clearance to be revoked until the FBI findings are complete. But this is just an epic shitstorm, all of which, like, Jared Kushner's sprinting off to Saudi Arabia to get out of the country.
Maybe they won't extradite me.
I don't know. We didn't. I have it to talk about later, but we can just say it now. Like, Saudi Arabia donated like $100 million, or exactly $100 million, to Ivanka Trump's female entrepreneurship fund.
That's ironic.
Yeah, I mean, Germany and Canada have also donated money, but Jesus.
But Germany and Canada allow women to drive and like go places.
I just wanted to point that out because because he has to pay back $300 million. And I'm sure he's not going to mess with those funds because the Trump family is just completely on the up and up. But yeah, Kushner's fucked.
The fact that you bring it up is just really, you're spreading fake news, and we need to be strong as a nation right now.
Listen, I'm all about fake news. Go ahead and quote me on that. Somebody will. But no, this is just such an epic shitstorm. We probably should have made it its own topic, but we don't really have a whole lot more to say on it.
I feel like all we can do is just list connections and just let the story stand on its own. Just
I watched videos because some of these people, Gorkov, like Milner, Abramovich, like all these people, and it's mainly his wife, Dasha Zakova. I had to like look up these people, and finally I just found videos that just had spiders, like they had like spider web graphs of just like connections to all these people.
Look like Glenn Beck with a Van Jones
spider
web, and it all goes back to the SDS.
Yeah, the biggest thing I guess we both agree on is his security clearance should be taken away, and should probably be moved from a person of interest. If these things are true and they're being reported, that he's trying to set up back channels and he has undisclosed contacts with the Russian ambassador, all this stuff. From what I saw, he was right there with those meetings with Flynn. He just wasn't working for Russia or taking money from Turkey and RT. I guess that's...
Yeah, if it were anyone else that had this, and this is the same argument that the right used against Hillary Clinton, if it were anyone else that had this email problem, she'd have lost her clearance immediately, and I firmly believe in equality, and if it were anyone else, they would lose their clearance immediately. So I'm gonna take the rights argument on this one.
Well, let's move on to the man everybody forgets is actually part of this administration until he says something stupid. Ben Carson, who this week had it's longer than this. It's a nice long spiel, but basically how poverty is a state of mind, and it just it's, and you said it. It's not so much that the comment was completely wrong, had facets of it that were true.
He just doesn't know how to speak with his mouth.
Well, it's somebody that has made it blatantly clear he is completely disconnected from reality, and he hates poor people, and he makes it clear every time he opens his mouth. Last time we talked about this man, it was because he made comments that government housing shouldn't be too comfy because they'll just keep living there.
Yeah, capitalism is how God picks who he loves.
It's this Republican mentality that people that are on government assistance are just lazy, and they just want to live off government assistance the rest of their lives. They don't want jobs. It's a very cruel and ignorant stance to just assume that somebody that is in need of assistance must be lazy and not actually in any kind of trouble. Because he even says, if you take somebody that has it all, strip them of everything, and put them on the street, they'll get back up there. Are we really stripping them of everything? Are we stripping them of education, everything that in their lives? Or are you just stripping them of their money? Because cases are they will be right back there because they can just ask somebody for a loan and restart everything. It's just stupid statement.
Part of me, I'm really torn. Part of me wants to give him a charitable reading because he said some stuff after. He's like, also, if you take someone with a bad mindset, give them everything, they'll end up right back at the bottom. And I was like, okay, like maybe a little more charitable reading. Like, I get the point you're trying to make is that mindset's important. I mean, poverty is blatantly not a state of mind. You can have the most optimistic mindset that you want and just be as positive as you can be and be dirt poor and starve to death. That's a perfectly understood reality. But you can also have a bad mindset, have everything, be a complete fucking moron, and end up at the bottom. Like, I kind of get what he's saying. It is just worded in a way that indicates that he is clearly out of touch with what it means to not be wealthy or well-connected. And I get, he came from a poor environment. You aren't anymore. And, that's like me saying, oh yeah, like 30 years ago, I used to be able to yo-yo really well. I know what it's like now. I still have that skill. You kind of probably lost touch. But the other part of me is torn, and like that's a charitable reading. The other part of me is torn because later he goes on to say, the government can function as an example and help provide a ladder. So I'm initially reading this as like Ben Carson just came out and said that the government has a degree of responsibility through the Department of Urban Development and Housing, or whatever his acronym is, to help people. And I'm like, that sounds cool. I don't really have an opposition to that, at least out of the gate, at a touching my heart level. But part of me just wonders, like, is he just saying those words because he's supposed to say those words and someone used a sock puppet to say, like, say these words? Or does he actually think that? Because if he actually thinks that, like, that's totally cool. And I appreciate that. Maybe he did get a little more grounded. Or he could just be talking and he's like, I feel like these are good words to say.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he should just stay out of politics.
Yeah, Ben Carson's proof that you can have really, really smart, dumb people in the world.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, maybe you could just be smart in one thing and completely idiotic in the other. But it's pretty clear he's disconnected from reality in some way. And hopefully we don't hear from him again for a while. Maybe when they cut his budget, won't be able to go on the radio as much. All right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, we're gonna break that. We're gonna break that 2-hour mark today. But so next we have Trump reveals the location of nuclear subs in a call to Duterte. He talks about the 2 nuclear subs in the water off the coast of the Korean Peninsula. He does it in a very bragging fashion, talking about the best subs in the world, in only the way that Donald Trump can, because he has to.
It's like a Jersey Mike's talk. The best subs in the world, man.
He's just he has to brag about everything, and I mean, a lot of people had outrage over this being sensitive information, but it was already public knowledge. It's not like he gave them. It's not he didn't give them longitude and latitude. Like they're in the water somewhere. You can try to go find them. I don't really suggest you go hunt down a nuclear sub because they have more than just a nuclear bomb on board. But that's fine.
It's got like the Navy and shit behind it. It was frustrating reading that because when I first heard it reported, I was like, oh, like that sounds bad. And all the U.S. outlets were just like, "Oh yeah, Donald Trump revealed that we had 2 nuclear subs in the Korean Peninsula," and then they related it back to the meetings that he had with Sergei Lavrov and how he revealed the sensitive information. And then I was reading like Reuters, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that information was published weeks ago," and then that was the end of the article. And I was like, "Oh, well, this seems much less alarming than I initially thought."
Yeah. So let's keep this moving along.
Yeah. The controversy that was
in another call. It may have been the same call. I don't actually know. I think it was another call, but it was sometime in the end of April. He called Duterte to congratulate him on his efforts in his drug war. Basically, to congratulate him on his success. He said he was doing a good job. He was a good man. This was something that was affecting a lot of nations, including the United States. Keep in mind, Duterte and his killing squads have murdered without any trial or due process close to 9,000 people, and since he started this drug war.
Makes me really optimistic about Jeff Sessions.
Part of me, you have to hope that Trump just doesn't know these things, but also it's just as scary to think he doesn't, considering he has very well-paid staff that are supposed to tell him this if he doesn't have the time. But
Mr. Duterte, I don't know what your drug policies are, but we're having a bit of an opioid problem. What do you recommend? Firing squads. Perfect. I love it.
Yeah. So Trump's done with his 9-day trip overseas, but we're going to talk about quite a few of his stops. He went to the Vatican and met with the Pope. I don't really go into a lot of what it says, but the Pope gave him a 192-page note on global warming, calling it a global problem with grave implications of environmental, social, economic, political, and for the distribution of goods. Trump's never going to read this. So, I mean, I like the Pope, even though I feel like a lot of Christians don't. because he doesn't say the traditional things.
Yeah.
Trump's never going to touch that document. He handed it to Ivanka, and she stuffed it in the side
Jared
seat of Air Force
do a
One.
Cliff Notes version.
Oh yeah, Jared wasn't there because he can't go out in the sun. Let's see. So, and then we have Merkel. This was like recent. I don't know why I put it this high, but she after the G7 summit comes out and talks about Europe needs to take care of itself, and they can't trust America with Trump in charge, and the UK after Brexit. This is one of those things where I was like, okay. I talked about it. You have plenty of people talking about the fact that like we have NATO and those alliances, but I don't know. A lot of these alliances, the people we're allied with aren't keeping up their end of the bargain. So if they want to start taking care of themselves more, I'm all for it. I don't know why. She was very aggressive with it, but
yeah, I think the idea is even if it's not NATO, like I'm all for people paying a little more of their 2%. I don't know how much Germany's paying. I'm a big fan.
Nobody's paying their 2% GDP. It's just
I'm all for NATO. I think it's a good idea. I agree with Matt Welch that I think we've allowed some countries in, probably not a good idea, and it can just provoke antagonism in the long run, make it more likely to go to war. But I look at her comment a little more abstractly, like, okay, we have to. We can't rely on them and trust them. Global leadership being the exemplar, taking the lead on big issues, because either we have this America First attitude, or the orangutan in office can't figure out how to work the doorknob. I take it a little more abstractly, like, hey, we kind of got to lead the way. I'm surprised they didn't mention France a little bit more. Germany and France are like the thing that kind of keep the EU running.
I think that's what she was talking about with when she mentioned Europe. But this was all after the G7 summit, which they all went. 6 of the 7 nations there pledged to comply with what they had already, with the Paris Accords, the climate agreement, except for Trump. Trump didn't. He tweeted, because that's where you get news from President Trump, that he was going to talk about it. He was going to make his decision next week. But if you go back and look at his history of tweets, where he's called it a hoax on multiple occasions, I don't really see this being something. Say what?
It's a hoax made by the Chinese to slow down the American economy.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of think he's unlikely that he's going to do it. I don't really. I mean, he could. No. But
I think that would require him to think climate change is actually real.
The biggest thing I got, they were all 7 of the members were doing a group photo in which they had to walk. It was about 700 feet, I believe, through Sicily to get to the hilltop where they were gonna take this group photo in front of each nation's flag, or each nation's leader was standing in front of their flag. Trump was late to the photo because he refused to walk and had to wait for a golf cart. I just find it funny. If you look up the picture, he's sitting there with his smug look on his face with his arms crossed as they drive him around.
It was probably instinct. He was just expecting one to be there. I mean, he spends a lot of time on the golf course.
Or more than likely, he's just exhausted because he... But yeah. So, I mean, we have the last thing, and I'm going to talk about his exhaustion too, where he canceled his speech in Israel because he didn't want to be heckled. The White House took the blame for it, saying they didn't think the president would be able to speak because of the jeers and cheers and heckling that would go on here.
I thought oranges were supposed to have thick skins, which is weird.
He has no kind of thick skin. But so
I'm just trying to work as many jabs in as I can, and then in the last 4 minutes.
Instead, he went to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and spoke there. This is where you saw that stuff. The Holocaust Museum. This is the Holocaust Museum, and he wrote "so amazing" in the guest book. But just a couple more notes on his trip. I mean, he cited exhaustion and sent Ivanka to speak with the Youth Forum on combating terrorism and on social media. I just find this kind of stuff funny considering all throughout his campaign he stated that Hillary and all his people running against him in the Republican Party didn't have the stamina to be president. And I mean, he couldn't even stay after the G7 summit to do a press conference like the rest of the world leaders. He had to get on his plane and leave because he was just so tired. He had his representatives come out and say he's been doing 14, 15, 17, 20-hour days. And or somebody asked, well, all the other leaders did a press conference after it. Why wouldn't Trump do a press conference? And the response was, I don't know if that's true. And that was it.
What?
So, yeah.
Every other news organization saying it's true. I guess my closing comment to this whole thing, just as we kind of laugh and joke about these, is how like people have nervous laughter. That's what I feel like the entire This Week in Trump is just nervous laughter.
I don't even know if it's nervous laughter. It's just laughing at the absurdity. It's like an SNL skit sometimes. It's a mix of corruption and foreign diplomats interfering in elections and brain surgeons talking about poor people. So there's that. But let's go ahead and wrap this thing up.
Yeah, I gotta go. I gotta really go to the bathroom. We've been doing this for 2 hours.
So yeah, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Twitter handle is at the AC Podcast. Armchairconstituents.com. You can get us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud. We will talk to you guys next week.